Fine, sorry. So now let's get started. Now let's get started with absolute basics of Swift. Okay, so let's start with variables. Now variables, as we know, the keyword to create a variable is var score equal to 0. Fine. Variable is something that we do not change throughout the course of the application, the life cycle. Now and constants is once you initialize, you cannot update. Now, there are a couple of concepts here which I would want you to understand. One is, so now this is variables, and then this is constants. Let's say name, because the name would not change. Uh, Fine. We have created variable and constant. Now there are a couple of things. Now there is something called type inference in Swift. Okay. So now let's say a score is fine. These are integers. Now, for example, I'm writing a cricket kind of a game. Okay, or any game where the score might not exceed a certain value. Or let's say there is something called marks. I'm storing marks. Okay, now I know that marks value would not be more than 100, correct? Yep. Now in that case, especially when you are writing a iOS application, right, it is extremely crucial that you start from the beginning or start from day one. You should be considerate about the space that you use, because space is everything. You cannot use a lot of space, firstly, and then you have to be considerate about the space, the memory, the battery, all of that from the user's point of view. I'll give a very small example, very quick example. For example, location services. Now, let's say you need a lat long of the user to fetch the weather information. Okay, so now once you have fetched the lat long of the user on application launch, you can know which city user is in. So let's say you fetched lat long, you figured out that the user is in Bangalore, and then you fetch the Bangalore's weather and you displayed. Now you don't have to keep reading users lat long, right, during the usage of the application. Just do it on the at the first attempt. Now you may not stop updating the location, so you will be keep getting location updates, and that will drain users battery, right? So in your case, you will have to be very careful that, and these are all case to case basis, so you'll have to be very careful that once in your use case, your use case, because you have got the lat long and you do not need it any further, you should stop updating the location. In that case, iOS will stop sending you the location updates, and that would save users battery. Make sense?
Yeah,
So all of these leads to performance, apps performance, or app size. Even app size is uh, what do you say, that for apps performance, the app size also matters. So all of this you is something that you should be careful about. Okay, and this is something
yes.
when we are talking about the memory. Okay, and it can be memory, it can be the app, the bundle size, the IPS size, right? So all of this you should be very considerate about. Now, let's say this score. Now I know that I am, or let's say, let's change it to marks. Okay. Now I know that I will be the maximum that marks this variable can hold is 100. Now, if you do this right, can you tell me what is the data type of marks?
It is int now.
Int, correct? Yes, it is
Yes.
int. You're right. So now it is int. So I can actually say colon int. Okay, and let's print it, because it will keep complaining that I'm not using it. And I will cover print in a while. So then we have done this, and this is called type inference. So basically, you don't have to put this. If you don't put this, then what the compiler would do is the compiler would see that the what is the value of marks, and it would say, "Acha, it is an integer," and then the compiler would consider marks as integer. When the compiler considers marks as integer, it would reserve a good amount of memory for marks to be stored. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah.
Now I don't need, so okay, so now int, do you know we have something called 8, 16, 32, 64 bits, right? So
Yeah, fix,
now,
yeah.
correct. So now
Yeah.
so this by default, no, this is int 64. Okay. Now I don't need that big of a number. So what I can do, I can just use int 8 here. Now I see that there are a lot of very few developers who actually use this. They are not at all considered. They will just use this. Most developers, if you see, even if you see a lot of good source repositories in Git, you would just see this. Okay. Now you should actually be considerate about what you are storing, and then based on that, Apple has provided you a couple of integer. So int is int 64. Okay, so Apple has provided you int 8, int 16, int 32, and int 64. Based on the requirement and based on the kind of value you would like to store, you should use the equivalent version of int. Fine. So in this
Yeah.
case, I can just use an int 8, and then I can save some space, some memory. Make sense?
Okay. Yeah, Abhishek.
Fine. So going forward, and I want you to follow all the best practices that I cover throughout the course, which includes solid principles, which includes being considerate about location, about performance, about memory. So when you work on assignments, I will expect you to consider all of these when you write code. Right?
Yeah. Sure, Abhishek.
Cool. So now now this becomes an int 8. Fine. And this is basically type inference. Type inference is you by default, if you do not mention, the compiler infers the type of marks as integer based on the initial value that you enter. Make sense?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, Abhishek.
Now next comes double the decimal points. So now let's say a price. Now price is also something that would keep changing. I would say a variable, and then let's say I 12.5. Okay. Now again let's print price. Now what is the data type of price?
It is float. Float or double.
Float or
Like,
double, right? Okay, great, good, very good point. It is float or double. Now depending on the language. Okay, in Swift the default of decimal is a double.
okay.
Okay. Now can you tell
Yeah.
me what is the difference between double and float?
Uh, the difference is like float is used for the smaller, like I am talking in general, like
Yeah,
float
yeah,
is used for
yeah.
small value, small decimal number, and double is for the big decimal number.
Okay, so basically, you are kind of right. So basically, it is more than the value, right? It is the precision that matters when it is float or double. So when you say double, it is uh, the precision is higher. Precision is accuracy. So after the decimal value, the accuracy to which you would need varies between float and double. Okay, so when you are dealing with something which is very where you need that kind of accuracy, if there are some dollar values and if there is any difference in conversion or anything or rounding off, you might lose some precision, and then for your the company might lose millions, right? So it is really important that you select the data types properly. I think I had a very interesting example of this double and float in YouTube. I remember there was something where it was actually showing dot 99999. I forgot that particular instance. But again, this is something which is very crucial. Now, by default, it is double. Okay, now again, the same concept of what we have learned for int. If you need that kind of precision, then this line of code is fine. If not, then you can say colon float,
Well, yeah.
right? Now this becomes a float. If you don't put this, it will be a double.
Okay, like by default it will be double.
Yes, by default it is double. By default,
Oh,
decimal values are double. If you do not need that kind of precision, because with higher precision, that comes with a price. You would be that would require more space to store, right? And then if you don't need, in most cases you may not need. In that case, you can just use float, and you'll be absolutely fine. Make sense?
yeah, yeah, Abhishek.
Awesome. So now you have type inference. Now let's go to string interpolation. And then, but before string interpolation, let's just see print. So for printing data, you just use print and then you put in whatever you would like to print. Now, do you have experience writing functions in JavaScript?
Yes, Abhishek.
Okay. Can you write a function in JavaScript? I'm not asking you to write now, but
Yes.
can you write a function in JavaScript that can take any number of parameters?
Any number of parameters.
Yeah. So if I say write a function which calculates principal interest based on principal rate and time, you would write a function that would accept three parameters: principal, rate, and time. Correct?
Oh, yeah.
I want you to write a function which takes any number of parameters. Can you do that in
Uh,
JavaScript? Do you know how to do that?
no, Abhishek, I have not came into that part.
Okay, so that is one.
Yes,
Okay, that is one.
yes,
Second is I would like to, okay, now if you write a function, right? Now in any language. Now let's say I am writing a function, the same example, calculating interest for principal, rate, and time. Now principal, rate, and time, I will have to tell the data type of principal, rate, and time. So in this case, we will cover whatever I'm saying verbally. I will be covering when we'll be talking more about functions. But basically, what I'm trying to cover is about print. So the data type of principal, rate, and time is something that you'll have to define. So you would say that your principal rate and time is, let's say, integer or double based on, or float based on your requirements. Now, so basically, when you write a function, you ideally you would have the number of parameters that you would need, and then the data type. Print in
yeah,
this case, right, is a
yes,
special function because print can take any number of parameters. So if you see here, pass, I can call print function, and I can pass price also and marks also. This this is great about print, right? And
yes,
that print function can take any number of parameters. The second thing what makes print special is that not only that the number of parameters can be variable, even the data type can be variable. So print can be different. So print can be print price here is float, marks here is int, and then you print does not care. You can pass any data type, any data with any data type, and print would function, right?
yeah,
So here we have a couple of concepts, and you will be writing your own functions which will be accepting any number of parameters, and then any kind of data type, and any number of parameters. All of that we'll cover when we'll talk more about advanced concepts of Swift. Fine.
yeah.
Okay, that's some basically that's something called generics which we'll be covering. Now, so okay, so now we have print. So for printing a value, you can just say print, and then you can put any values that you'd like to add. Now let's say I want to print name. Okay, so I can either just say print name, and then this would print name. But what if I'd like to print something called my name is, and then the whatever the name is stored in the variable. So in this case, I would use something called string interpolation. So I'll say double quotes, and I'll say my name is,
Yes.
and then for string interpolation I would use this and then brackets, and then inside this I will put in any variable that I'd like to print. Now this can be any data type, so I can say name, and then this prints my something called my name is, and then the value. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah, Abhishek.
Fine. So this is my string interpolation. Now we have seen type in variables, constants, type inference, string interpolation. Fine. And then we have, let's next talk about the functions. Okay. So then I actually wanted to move on to UIKit, but then I want to you to try a couple of functions and closures as an assignment. So let's now move on to functions and closures. I'll just give you a quick overview so that you can work on your assignments, and then we can cover more in detail if you would need. Fine.
Sure, Abhishek.
Cool. So then this is my function. So I'll go off like outside of this function, and I'll create a function. Now, very simple function, right? So it says calculate area, and then it would accept uh, length, and then that can be, let's say, float, or let's say double, your wish, and then breadth, and that is also double, and then this returns uh, the area, right? And then this would return, okay, this would return L into B. Make sense?
Yeah.
So this is how basically you write a function. This is the function name. This is the func keyword, then the function name, then all the list of parameters that you would accept, and then the return type. Fine.
Yeah.
In Swift 5, if the function just have one line of code, right, and if you are returning something, you do not have to write return statement. This is a valid statement, valid line of code.
Okay.
Okay, so if there is only one line of code, now if there is another line of code, then it would not work. Then it will
Okay.
say it is not working. Fine. So
Yeah.
then, so any whenever a new version of programming language comes in as a release, I expect the developers to go through the changes and start using the new language. Okay, and these
Yeah.
Swift languages versions are always mapped with the Xcode. So based on the Xcode that you use, you get the respective iOS versions and the Swift version. Fine. So now this is the latest Swift, and then I would want you to use all the updates that has come up with Swift. So older version of Swift, you had to write return. Newer versions may you can skip return. So going forward also, I want, and this is even as an assignment, I would want you to explore what's new in Swift 5, and what are the, what changes are there, what are the language updates, and then use those updates. Fine.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Sure.
This also goes for Xcode. This also goes for iOS. You should always see the delta. What changed? Okay, whenever a new version is released. Fine.
Yeah. Yeah.
Awesome. So now this is my function. Very simple function. Any questions here?
No question.
Okay. Now let's say you are coding in any programming language. Let's say in JavaScript or any language. Now this function you can write in JavaScript, correct?
Yeah.
Now can you write a function which takes two parameters, length and breadth, and returns not just the area but also the perimeter? So now I would need this function to return two things, area as well as the perimeter. How would you do it?
Pyramid. Um,
Right? So now in any programming language, there are maybe a couple of concepts. So you might go with an array, for example. So in array, you can store any number of data. So you may end up creating an array, putting in these data, and then so in Swift, there is something called tuples which you can use. Okay,
okay.
so
Yeah.
now I would now the same function. Let's change to a tuple implementation. So in this case, calculate area, length and breadth, and then it returns double. Now I want this same function to return area and as well as perimeter. So I would need two return types, right? So I would say double bracket, and then I would again say double. So now it is returning two items.
Two items. Yeah.
Okay, simple. It is basically just logic. Now, in this case, I will have to return again the area. The first one is for area, and the second one is for, let's
Pyramid.
say, perimeter. Exactly. So, what is the formula for perimeter?
2 into nine plus plus.
Exactly, L plus B. Make sense? So,
Yeah.
L into B and 2 into L plus B. Correct?
Yeah. Raj.
So this would return. So this is just this. This is basically my tuple implementation. If I have to call this tuple, I can just say calculate area, and I can pass my length and breadth. So let's say I'll pass 20 and 15, and then whatever is the value that is returned, I would store it in a variable. So if it was only returning one value, I would just say let area. But now because it is returning two values, I would say area and perimeter. So area stores the first variable, the first entry. So first is area, so area is stored here, and the perimeter is stored here. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah.
I can
And then we
also
can print it like print area and then print perimeter.
exactly. So I can say
And
print area and then uh, print perimeter. Now there is another way also. I can also say let result is equals to calculate area, and then I can also say sorry, print result dot and then 0 and then result dot 1.
oh,
Okay, so this is again another syntax of using tuples. In this case, dot 0 would return me the first value and dot 1 would return me the second value.
okay.
Okay, I absolutely hate this. The reason why I hate this, and I do a lot of code reviews and I never approve a merge request which has this. Can you tell me the reason why I prefer this over this?
Uh, result dot zero.
So these are the two. This is first approach. This is second approach. I think this approach is better. Why?
Because the readability is like I can understand that print area, print perimeter, but here like result dot zero. Mm,
Come again?
uh, the code readability is like it is not looking good. Like
Exactly. So first thing is readability. All right. So if I'm reading, I would first I would prefer to read as this, and then with readability, it's also about understanding, and that is the only reason. Now both does the exact the same thing, but then if I am going to read this line of code a month from now after writing, I would not know what by looking at this I would not know what result.0 is and what result 1 is. I'll have to go back and
yeah,
see the function what it
function.
does,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, yeah.
I don't want that. So in this is why I would prefer this. Just by looking at this code, I would know that the first result returns area and the second one returns perimeter. Make sense?
Perimeter. Yeah, yeah.
Awesome. So now, as the assignment, I will give you a couple of functions, or maybe you can try a couple of functions with tuples. So you can try a couple of functions with one return type, multiple return type, and then with tuple, and then you can come up with a few function examples. Fine.
Sure, sure, sure.
Next is about closures. Again, we will be discussing a lot about closures when we discuss about networking. But just a brief idea I wanted to give about closures. Do you have a hard stop at 11?
No, Abhishek.
Awesome.
I'm fine. Yeah.
Awesome. Now about closures. So now let's say okay, I'll just give a random example. This may not make sense from a logic perspective of why are we doing this with closures, but just to give you an example of closures, okay? We will write a lot of closures, and closures are mainly used when you do a networking functions where you would like to use, where you'd like to know when a particular event has completed. Okay, so I'll just give you a very basic example and then we will see closures a lot in detail when we work on network. Fine.
Yeah.
So
Sure.
let's say a greet and then let's say name string and then let's say return and then this would I would not use return. I would say let's just or just return name or let's return hi name. Fine. Now this is a very basic function which just has one parameter and one return type.
Yeah.
Okay. Now I'll change
Yeah.
this to a closure. So for closures, I'll say func greet, and then let's say I may have other variables also with my closure. So I'll let's say name, it accepts name, and then instead of returning something, right, I would say I would use this as a variable, as a parameter. So I'd say completion, and then I would accept parameter here and I would not return anything, and then I would call completion and then I would say hi. I'll explain all of this. Hi name. Now what basically is happening and what basically is the difference here? Now what happens is let's say you have code which is let's say background processing, or let's say something that takes time to process. Now you will not be blocking the main thread for your execution, because when you do a, a time intensive operation on the main thread, the application will hang, the user will not be able to use the application. Okay,
Yeah.
so
Yep.
you have to use background threads, and again we will be covering a lot of these things in upcoming sessions of main thread, background threads. But just to give you an idea, when what happens is, if you are running on a thread, right, and then let's say this is something that takes some time. Now if it is a return type, right, it would go through this and then it would just return. So in this case it will not have any data, and then it would just return. There is no way for you to know that this execution is completed. Okay, so there is no
Sure.
completion here. You have no idea when this gets completed. So when you return, you get no data. Now with completion handlers or with closures, because we are passing a function as a parameter, what happens is, as soon as these my logic is completed, I am calling this function. So when you call this function, what happens is the control goes back to the function. Okay, so as soon as this is completed, the control goes back to the function, and then there I can write my logic. And again, I do not expect that you would understand now, because this is a vague example for you to explain. You will understand this better when we work on networking, because that is where actually I can give you a example where you will find a need for closures. You cannot do return types because of the threads. Okay, so as an example, I know this is vague. You would just say that why can't I just do this? Why am I doing this? But then when you will learn about networking, you will actually see that you cannot do this. You will have to use closures if you use closures. Now again, there are a couple of alternatives for closures as well, such as async await. But again, all of that I'll cover. Fine. So
Yep.
then
Sure.
this is basically my completion. Now this becomes my closure, and how do I call this? I would say greet. Now you see I have two functions, two flavors of it. One is just with the name, which would return something. So I will say greet Abhishek, and this is returning something. So I will call greetings one. And then again I hate one greetings two. I am using this now because I would need another greetings variable, but the variable names should always be proper, which tells what it does. Fine.
Yep. Yep.
Now and then I would have greetings two, which is the second flavor of this function with the completion. So I would say Abhishek, and then completion. I will go to the completion, I'll press enter, and then this is where you will get the return. So whatever I return here, there I'll get here. Okay, so this is
Yep.
my greetings. So then in this case, because this function is not returning anything, I can just remove this because there is no return type. Okay, and then this is where I can print my greetings. So let's say greetings, and this is where I would print greetings one. So these are the two flavors. One is with return type where it just returns and I store it and the return value and I print. And this is my with closures. So with closures, I don't get it as a return type. I get it inside here as part of the closure, and then I print it. Make sense? At least
Yep.
50%.
Yeah. Vishek, in line number 50, basically in completion,
Yeah,
inside the bracket you have given string. Like basically this function will accept one string and it will return void.
correct,
Like it will return nothing.
correct. What does it mean, right?
Yeah, like I have seen in every closure example, like the return type is always void.
Makes sense. See, so now in this case, for example, and yeah, in most cases, your return type will be what, because you don't want to return anything. In most cases, no. You would want to
Yeah.
accept things, and whatever you accept, you would call your function with this. So, for example, even in this function, right, I don't need a return here. There is no scope for me. I can just pass whatever is my parameter, and I can just directly use this. So in mostly I would say 99.99%, I have in fact in my 13-14 years I have never used a closure which I never felt or implemented a closure which has a return type. It mostly it will always be a parameter and there's no return type, because whatever I'd like to return I would return as a parameter in my completion.
Mm.
Okay.
Yeah,
Now,
Abhishek.
now I forgot something. Okay, I forgot. I had something here. So, okay, fine. So then these are my two flavors. One is with my return type and one is with my closure. Fine. Okay, yeah, yeah. Sorry. I had type alias in mind. So for example, now you'll be writing a lot of closures in your so code. Now you don't want to keep writing this completion, all of this syntax. No, I actually again this is not good from a code readability point of view, right? So then what I usually do is I use something called type alias a lot. So in type alias you can just save anything which you frequently use, and you can save it somewhere and you can then use that. So in this case here, no, this part I'll store as a type alias. So I'll go up, because this is a function, I'll have to go beyond the function scope, and I'll say type alias, I'll say completion handler and equal to, and then I'll say I am just storing this in something called a type alias. So instead of this I will just use here. Now I can say this. Fine.
Yeah, Abhishek.
This, yeah, this is again for a code reuse it, sorry, readability point of view. Fine. All right. So now you would be writing a couple of as a assignment from Swift point of view. You'll be practice some of these, practice functions, practice closures, practice tuples, and then come up with a few examples, research a little bit of these, research how to write some complex functions with these, and then we will review in the next session. Right.
Sure, Abhishek. Yeah.
Awesome. So maybe I'll just take some 15-20 more minutes, and I wanted to cover a little bit about UI so that you can practice a few UI as well. Fine.
Sure, sure, sure.
Awesome. So now firstly, whenever you are adding some, so let's first add a few icons. Okay. I have two icons stored here. Background. And I am adding it just randomly here, but we will be using assets, or maybe we can use assets here itself. Let's delete this. Let's go to assets. Let's do it the right way. So this assets is basically where you will be managing all the assets. You go to add, you say image set, and then you add. I'll call it background, and then now so 1x 2x 3x is basically earlier for supporting retina, non-retina, different size of devices. We used to maintain different size of images. Okay. Now in a lot of now in recent changes how iOS is evolving, right? Now you don't have to
Yeah.
maintain these separately. You can go here and you can select single scale, and then you can just use a SVG, a PDF, or a PNG, and then that would uh, scale accordingly. Okay. So then I
Yeah.
would go,
Yes.
I'll put my background here. I'll add another image set. I'll, let's say, car, and then again I'll do a single scale, and then I'll drag and drop my car here. Awesome. So then I have my two images here. Fine.
Yeah.
I'll go to my main where I design my view. I will, this is basically my add. So when I add, I get all the UI components here. Okay.
Yeah,
Now
Abhishek.
here, let's say in a lot of cases you might be adding a background image. Let's say you are working on a weather application. Okay. So then and I need a blur background in the as a background. So I'll drag and drop an image view. Okay. Fine till now.
Yeah, Abhishek. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Now I want this to be a full screen. So either I can do one thing, either I can drag all the way up, all the way down, and then I don't want to drag it till here. I want user should be able to see the battery, the Wi-Fi and everything. So I'll just drag and drop till here. Okay.
Yeah, yeah,
So either I can drag and drop and then I can go here and then I can click and then I don't need margins. So this is unchecked and then I can click these four. These four basically tells that how much space I need from the top, from the right, from the left and from the bottom. I am saying all zeros, which means I do not need any space. Make sense?
yeah,
Okay, and then I'll say add four constraints. So constraints is basically rules. What you are here doing is you are telling iOS that I would want this image view to always stick to all four corners. So be it iPhone, be it iPad, it will always stick to all four corners. Fine.
yeah,
Now
yeah.
this is UIKit way of doing it. Going forward, so initially we would cover UIKit on your request, but going forward we will be seeing how to do the same thing with Swift UI. Fine.
Yeah, fine,
So
Abhishek.
this auto layout concept is very specific to UIKit. Okay, in Swift UI we do not have auto layouts like these. Fine.
Yeah,
Now
sure.
I have this and then I'll go to image and I'll select my image background and now if you see all the images that I have in my project is listed here. Right. I'll select background and then I have this background here. Now you will see that I drag my image view is still here, but my image is not covering the whole thing, right? This is because of the content mode. So here you see there is something called content mode. It says aspect fit. So in aspect fit, it basically fits based on the aspect size. I would say aspect fill. So it will maintain the aspect size, but it will fill the screen. Okay, and this is something that I like. So now this screen is designed with a background view and then I can run it on any device, iPhone or iPad or any different iPhones or iPads, and it will always be full screen. Make sense?
Yeah, yeah, Abhishek.
Now I need let's say a city here. Okay, so now I'll go back and then I'll drag a label. So I did a plus, I selected a label, I'll drag and drop a label here and then I will make it a little big. Now, okay. Now for this label, I want based on my parent view. So this is my parent view. Okay. And my parent view has a background image. And then all of these basically are part of my parent view. So this label, based on the parent view, I want to set some constraints. So when I say constraints, I want some space here in the bottom,
The bottom. Yeah,
right? And then I would want this to be center, so maybe I can say some space in the left, some space to the right, some space to the bottom, and then I would want height and width. So when you work with auto layouts, right, there are four things that you'll have to consider. One is x and y, which is if this is the label, where this label should be in my in my y axis and in my x axis. Okay. So there are four things.
okay,
One is x and y, and the other thing is height and width. So as long as a UI component, a label in this case, fits these four, tells iOS these four values, iOS will not complain about it, and it will render it correctly. Fine.
sure.
So in this case, for example, y-axis. In y-axis, where do you want this to be? So in y-axis, based on y-axis is this vertical, right? So vertically, I want this to be at the bottom of the screen, correct?
Okay, yeah,
And horizontally, which is my x-axis, I want this to be in the center of the screen, and I can also say that some portion to my right I can fix and some portion to my left I can fix. Fine. I what we can do is let's make it full. Let's make use of the full width. Okay. So now what I'm saying is no matter what, you just stick to my right and stick to my left with some margin. Okay. So this did not have margin and this has margin. Am I making sense or do you want me to
yeah.
explain label again?
Uh,
Uh,
Basically,
uh,
like,
yeah, I'll do one
here,
thing. I'll do one thing. This again, this x, y, and height and width. I'll explain as in within another example. Okay, then it will make more sense. Okay. Now,
here,
just after this. Okay. So I'll just complete this label thing, and then I'll use another example to explain you that. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, so this is my label for x y axis. It should be it should be bottom aligned, and for in x axis it should be somewhere. It should be center x center. So now I'll drag and drop my label, and I'll go to whatever with respect to I want to say. So either I can say with respect to my background, other components, or I can say with respect to my parent view. Okay. So now I can
Okay.
drag drop to my parent view. I'll release my mouse, and then I'll get a couple of options. Okay. For my
Yeah.
constraints. Now let's say for my y-axis, I want this to have to bottom align with some value, correct?
Yeah. Sure, yeah.
So then tell me what I should choose, leading, top, trailing, or bottom.
Bottom space to say, space
Safe
safe
area.
area.
Bottom space to safe area, I'll select, and then it will make sure that this sticks to the bottom. Okay?
Yeah.
Now again I'll do the same thing. I'll drag and drop this to view, and then if you see it is red because now it has y-axis but it does not know x-axis, so it is complaining.
X-axis.
These four things you should satisfy. Okay. Now
Yeah.
now I want this to be center aligned, right? So I can say center horizontally in safe area.
Yeah.
Okay,
Oh.
so because in x-axis I want this to be horizontally aligned. Again, this is something that I'll cover as another example also. Okay, so don't get intimidated. Now this is fine. I have done my x and y axis. Now you see there is still yellow, which is a warning, and then there is
Warning.
still a dotted and the orange, right? So there is a orange line and then dotted orange. Okay. This means that x and y I have given, but height and width I have not given. So your this orange line is basically your actual label which we have drawn. But then if you run it on the screen, right, it will actually be this size. It will actually come here because you have not given height and width. So now let's give height and width. Now your x and y axis we have given with respect to my view. Now can you tell me height and width? For height and width I should give with respect to what? So let's say your height. What's your height?
180 centimeter.
Okay. So
So,
then, yeah.
yeah.
Okay. So then 180 centimeter, is it with respect to something, or is it does not change? Is it relative or is it absolute?
180 centimeter relative to ground.
Relative to ground. But then in any background, in any environment, you will always be 180, right? It is not that this is with reference to something. When I say with
Yeah.
reference to, I may say that you might be shorter compared to someone and taller compared to someone. That is relative, right?
Yeah.
But then 180 is your absolute. That won't change based on the surrounding. Make sense?
Yeah.
So there is
Yeah.
no reference here. Reference might be you might be taller. So then I say that you're taller with reference to someone, right? So in this case, when you take a reference, then that becomes a reference. So in this case, when I'm saying x-axis or y-axis, right? This is with reference to something, right? This should be bottom of the screen. So this label should be bottom of the main screen, the main view. So this is why we dragged it to the main view. Now when we want to set absolute, not reference, in that case, we will drag this to itself. So I'll take my label, and then I will not drag to this background or this view. I'll drag it within itself.
Okay. Yeah.
Okay, because this is absolute. So I'll say again control click, and if you also see here, if I drag horizontally I'll get width, if I drag vertically I'll get height. So you, based on how you drag, that options change. I'll drag diagonally, so I'll get both options, width and height.
Okay.
Okay, and
Yeah.
then I
Yeah.
can select, I can use shift to select multiple constraints. So I'll say shift height and width. Okay, and now if you see this, all the warnings are gone because we have satisfied x, y, length and breadth. Sorry, x, y, and yeah,
X, Y,
basically
width and height.
size.
Yeah.
ठीक है, length and width, basically the size. ठीक है, make sense?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Now I'll just go here and I'll just change, let's say I would say Seattle, and then I'll use some any random color and then some font, and then I'll say, let's say 45 or 36, and then I would say and I will say central line. Fine. So now this becomes my background. This basically becomes my screen, which the user would say. This is where I would pass the lat long and get the city name. And once I have the city, Seattle, does it have double T? I think it has single T. Let's see.
I think it has double T.
Double T only, right?
Yeah, double T. Yeah, it has.
Yeah, this is correct. Fine. So then this, so and this is something that I would dynamically update. Okay. All of that we will
Yeah.
see how that is done. But this is now one example. Now I would let's see one more example. Okay, because I want you to understand the X, Y, height and width. So now I can create another one more screen. I can just say plus and then I can say view controller and then I can drag drop. Now again, don't worry about this view controller, what basically it does. We will see about this when we learn about multiple screens. So of course your application will have lot of screens, and this is where my multiple view controllers would come into place, and then we will connect one screen to another screen. Okay. So now
Yeah.
this is my another one more screen for my screen designing, and this arrow basically indicates my starting point of the application. Okay, all of this we'll see, don't worry. Now
Okay.
this becomes my another screen. Now let's put some background color. So I'll go here, I'll say system background, let's select teal, fine. And then now let's again drag an image, and then let's keep it in the center, and then let's select a car. Fine.
Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
let's play around with this. Okay. Now I want this car to be centered horizontally and vertically. Like however you say this, see this now. I want this exactly like this, and I also want to retain the size. The size should be same. Okay. Now you will be telling me the constraints. Okay. The size of this uh, image, I want absolute, I don't want any reference. I want you to specify the size. So I would drag and drop to the view or to itself.
I need to specify the width and height here.
Yes,
Yeah, I need to within itself only,
within
like
itself,
diagonally.
diagonally, exactly. I'll release it and I'll select shift and I'll say width and height. Okay,
Yes, yes, yes.
done. Now it becomes red. Why is it red?
Because I need to give X and Y.
Correct. Now let's talk about x-axis. In x-axis, I want this to be centrally horizontal, basically center horizontally, right?
Yeah,
And in
center
y-axis,
horizontal.
what do I want?
Yeah, yeah.
Y-axis, what do I want?
Uh, Y axis also centrally I want.
Center what?
Uh,
Vertically?
Y center vertically.
Correct?
Yes, vertically. Yes, yes, yes,
Vertically.
yes.
So this is center horizontally. This is center vertically.
Okay, vertically. Yes,
Correct.
yes.
Now with this is with respect to it itself or the main view.
With respect to main view.
Very good. So I'll drag drop to the main view. Correct.
Yeah.
I can all drag here or I can also drag here. Same thing. Okay.
Yeah. Yes, yes,
So I'll
yes.
drag here main view, and then what should I select?
Uh, Top space to safe area.
Uh,
Sorry. The center horizontally in safe area
okay. And anything else?
and center vertically.
Correct. Correct. These two.
Horizontally in safe area. This
Correct.
one, yeah.
Correct. These two.
Yeah.
Done. Now this will always be in the center. Make sense? Easy?
Yeah.
Any
Easy.
questions?
No.
Now I'll remove the constraints. So for removing constraints, I'll go here and I'll say clear constraints. It says selected view or it says all view. So I'll say selected view because I only want constraints for the car to go. Okay?
Yeah.
I have done clear constraints. Now let's change the size. Okay, and then I want this to be here.
Okay.
You'll be getting a very interesting assignment today. So I'll be here. Okay. Now I what I want is this should be here. So it is not anywhere center. It should be here. So bottom of the screen and left aligned. Okay. And then I want this to retain its size. Now tell me what I should do.
Retain size means the actual size only that I'm
Whatever
giving
size
it
it
to.
is now, right? I want this size.
Okay.
What should I do?
Uh, like I will be putting the cursor within the image only
Okay,
diagonally.
okay, very good.
Yeah.
Diagonally, and
Uh,
I'll say height and width. Okay.
Height and width. Yeah, height and width.
Okay, now comes the
And
interesting part.
yeah, I will take the cursor and I will go out of the image.
Okay, take the cursor, go out of the image. Now what I should
Yeah,
select? This
and
is interesting.
yeah, bottom space to save area.
What will it do?
It will basically align with the bottom.
And what else? So it says bottom space, right?
Yeah, bottom space
Let's
to save area.
select. What else?
And I have given the uh, I have given the x-axis, right?
The x-axis you have told that it should be x-axis you have not given. You have only given y. From
Yeah, yeah,
y-axis it should.
yeah. I have given the y-axis.
Correct.
Yeah, and
What based on for x-axis what it should be?
um, trailing space to save area.
Come again?
Trailing space to save area.
Okay, so I'll explain. But good guess. So top is this, okay? Bottom is this. This is leading and this is trailing, okay?
Okay, this one is the my left is
The left is leading, right is
okay.
trailing.
Okay, so leading I will be leading
Correct.
space to say yeah this
Done,
one.
done. You are absolutely right. Okay?
Yeah, yeah.
These are your constraints. Now again, I'll go back clear constraints, and then now I'll put it here. Now tell me. I'll do the height and width because that is
The height and
obvious.
width.
Now tell me.
Uh, trailing space to safe area,
Okay,
and then top space to safe area.
done. Easy? Very easy, right?
Is yeah, very easy.
Very easy. So this is basically how it is. As an assignment, I will give you a couple of things. Okay, couple of interesting stuff. Now, what we will do is let's clear the constraints. Now, let's select a view. So I also have something called a view, image view or view. Okay, so then or just image view is also fine. What I want is first assignment is I want you to take two images. Okay,
Yeah.
put it one like this, and then it should come like this. Okay, so basically you have two image views, one on top of another. So it can be iPhone, it can be iPad, whatever. This
Yeah.
the height and width. Now the height and width you are making constant, right? You are not using reference, correct?
Yeah.
Now in this example, I want you to use reference. So what I want is there is something called equal height and width. So if you see there is something called equal height and width. Okay.
Okay.
So I
Yeah.
want you to
Both length and breadth will be same.
correct. So what in equal height and width what we do, we define for one and then for the other one I say it should be equal to equal height and width of this one. Okay. So this is called
Okay.
referencing. Height and width also can be referenced. So now, as an assignment, what I want you to do is you should be able to drag and drop two image views. So it will basically be two cars. Okay, and then it should, no matter what the screen resolution is, it should always be it should always take 50% of the screen. So this will take 50% of the screen and this will take the remaining 50%. Make sense? Am I making sense?
Yeah, yeah, it's
And then
fine.
once you do this, then I want you to do this with 4. So I will show you a better thing. Instead of using image view, you can also use view. View is just an empty view. Okay. So what we'll do, we will use this. So this becomes my, let's select some background colors, and then something like this you have to do. Okay.
Yeah,
So again, this is again something that green, and then this is just choose any random color. Okay. So now this is something called grid view. Okay. So in some applications you might have seen a grid. Now there are multiple ways of doing grid: dynamic grid or static grid. Dynamic grid is you can keep adding elements to a grid. Static grid is something like this. When you know that there are only 4 items, you can design a screen like this where you just have these 4. So your first assignment is to have with play around with 2 image views or image, and then your next assignment is have 4. So in this case, you will have 4 images or views, whatever, and then it should always be same size and width. So and it should also support landscape and portrait. So if I go to landscape mode, then this the width will increase. Got it, no?
yeah, yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Basically, I need to provide constraints to those things, right?
Correct. So you have to
Yeah,
provide constraints to make sure that, so after constraints, you run it on your iPhone or your simulator, and then you see that it is coming properly or not. So you can run with iPhone, iPad, and you can check whether it is coming correctly.
yeah,
Okay, I'll
sure.
just show.
Yeah,
So this one we have not seen, right? So for example, this one, no, Seattle. I can select an iPad, and or yeah, I can just select this and then I can run, and we'll just see that this Seattle and this image, all of that will be proper even on an iPad. Okay,
yeah,
right. It is running here. Fine, it is full screen.
yeah,
The my I can see a battery and everything. Below it is full screen, and then it is Seattle. Makes sense? Correct?
yeah,
As
yeah,
expected. Now if I want to run this one, no, I can just select this view controller and I can say is initial view controller as, I can tick. Now arrow moves here and then this will run. I'll run. Okay, why does it say build field? Have I? Okay, fine. And we'll see. Don't worry. But then uh, maybe if you want, you can just play around with one. Okay. So then have a couple of these examples ready, and then we will see how this goes. Okay. So I
yeah, yeah,
want you to try a couple of these UI, and then we will see. And then we'll extend our UI kit and also Swift in the next session.
sure, sure, Abhishek.
ठीक है. Awesome.
Yeah, sure.
So